Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Mrinmoy Pramanik. I teach comparative Indian language and literature at the University of Calcutta. Today we will discuss a module from Translation Studies, and the module is on European translation of India. The content writer of this module is Sharoni Roy, research scholar, Vishwa-Bharati University. The reality of the colonial encounter in India had left both the imperial center and the colonial margin in a state of cultural linguistic flux, where notions of literary influence became rather unsure. The English not only introduced their own text in the colony, but also eagerly read the translated Indian text. But the asymmetry of power relations between the two parties informed the period all along, which resulted in a biased hierarchical estimation of literature, culture and language. Gauri Vishwanathan has hinted at the ideological underpinnings of the mission, where raising Indians to the intellectual level of their Western counterparts constituted a necessary prerequisite to literary instruction, especially in text from the native culture, and consequently to forestalling the danger of having unfortified minds falsely seduced by the impurities of the traditional literature of the East. Translations from Indian languages into English are products of this special situation of the late 18th and 19th century British India. A similar point is reiterated by Tejaswini Niranjana when she speaks that European translations of Indian text prepared for a Western audience provided the educated Indian with a whole range of Orientalist images. Even when the Anglicized Indian spoke a language other than English, he would have preferred, because of the symbolic power conveyed by English, to gain access to his own past through the translations and histories circulating through colonial discourse. The translations initiated in the period of British Orientalism in India provide an enduring account of the construction of knowledge and relationships integral to colonial rule, where translating acts as a tool of ideological containment. The period from 1772 to 1840 witnessed multiple systems of knowledge constructed by the British, and translations were one outcome of this knowledge creating enterprise. A series of translations of ancient Indian text undertaken by the British after 1770 has served for generations among Indians and Europeans as an authentic account of India. The Orient was translated and made available for self-definition not only to the Europeans but also to the Orientals themselves. This set off a many-sided process in which the British were engaged. Translation was one of the manifestations of this process. Rita Kothari commented it. Michael de Courtieu hints at the inherent challenge of the act of translation when he says, "We no longer believe that behind the doors of our cities in the nearby distance of the countryside there are vast poetic and pagan pastures where one can still hear songs, myths, and the spreading murmur of the folklied." A Danish word. Folklied is a Danish word that cannot be translated in English as such, but it means what belongs to the people. Now, not only the sets of binaries suggested in the lines as that of between the country and the city, the rhythmic, poetic and the prosaic, the elitist and the populist, the creative and the bookish, speaks of a fundamental breach in the discourse of modernity. But the very limitations of translation signal the failure of any attempt to reproduce any original voice lost to the age of modern technology. The act of translation is essentially a political act which demands the erasure of the voice of the subject. It is a temporal act of representing the absent or the non-present. In a colonial context, the colonized subject lives always and already in a state of translation. Tejaswini Niranjana explicates how translation functions as a transparent presentation of something that already exists, although the original is actually brought into being through translation. Paradoxically, translation also provides a place in history for the colonized. The Hegelian conception of history that translation helps bring into being endorsed a teleological hierarchical model of civilization based on the coming to consciousness of spirit, an event for which the non-Western cultures are unsuited or unprepared. Translation is thus deployed in different kinds of discourses like philosophy, historiography, education, missionary writings, travel writings to renew and perpetuate colonial domination. Colonialism triggered a temporal displacement in the colonized. For the experience of being colonized is the experience of lagging behind time, and modernity constitutes that promise which eludes one with hopes of similarity and simultaneity of historical progress. The ideas of linearity and sequentiality were important markers of the colonial time frame. Central to the creation of a historical narrative is the question of progress from an oral, illiterate culture to a literate and written one. Progress is scriptural in type. The oral is that which does not contribute to progress. Reciprocally, the scriptural is that which separates itself from the magical world of voices and tradition. And the two are supposed to be mutually exclusive categories, related in a temporally sequential relationship where one naturally follows the other. An important departure is to be noted that it was not a completely oral culture that the English and ascribed to India, rather they ventured to know India through its written text, what Niranjana has called a textualized India. At the same time, notes Ganesh Devi, Jones was the first British scholar to perceive Indian in terms of a literary culture, and his discovery of India as a nation with a literature and a literature extending to remote antiquity enthused his readers in Britain to look to India for literary inspiration. Being appointed the Governor General of Bengal in 1772, Warren Hastings recommended that the British colonial administration should seek to rule the territories under its control not according to the British law but according to the laws of the native regions. And for that purpose, the colonial officials must know where to find the laws and also how to read them. His proposal led to the birth of the Western discipline of Indology, encouraging the British government officials to learn Sanskrit. The English line of inquiry tragedy, Aurangzeb, written in 1675, is an important early text that projects dominant Oriental stereotypes, including the erotic, subversive, irrational colonial female body and particular models of Indian politics and systems of succession. But the arrival of Sir William Jones in 1783 in Calcutta creates the historical juncture that engineered the birth of a new cultural consciousness whose declared mission of coming to India was to know India better than any Indian knows. While still on board of the frigate Crocodile carrying him from England to India, he prepared a memorandum detailing his plan of study. This included a study of the laws of the Hindus and the Mohammedans, the history, geography, art and aesthetics of India. This memorandum could easily be regarded as an early draft of the plan of the historical Asiatic Society. William Jones was, however, not the earliest among the Orientalists of the East Indian Company to arrive in India. About a decade earlier came Charles Wilkins 1770, Nathaniel Brassey Halhed 1772 and Jonathan Duncan 1772. Warren Hastings, bright young men who had paved the way for the two future institutions, the Asiatic Society and the College of Fort William. In Asiatic Researches, the Journal of the Asiatic Society, in which nearly all Jones's work in mythology, literature, linguistics, botany, history and poetry was printed, Jones continued his work in aesthetics. 6th Anniversary Discourse 1790 and on the mystical poetry of the Persians and Hindus 1792 expand upon what would later become an essentially romantic view of poetry as resulting from mystical experience. His translation of the Indian dramas like Shakuntala by Kalidasa, The Fatal Ring 1799 and Gita Govinda by Jayadeva in 1789 ushered in an enthusiasm for Indian culture in Europe. Jones' translation of Kalidasa's Shakuntala was a major event that introduced the literary East to the West. The indistinct nature of genres in India, history sliding into myth or turning into fable, was a bewildering phenomenon for the British. Even before he came to India, Jones had heard of a genre called Natak, which was said to contain ancient history uncorrupted by fable. And finally, when he reached India, he heard about the play Shakuntala and decided to translate it. There was a basic contradiction in the historical model that the Orientalists had proposed to the Indians. On the one hand, they claimed it to be following a linear progression from a golden past through barbaric present to a reinvigorated modern future under the guidance of the British. On the other hand, they defined it as untouched by hands of time or history and to be continuing in a state uninterrupted darkness. Jones ventures to resolve the contradiction by differentiating between Indian religion and language, which have remained unchanged, and arts, government and knowledge, which have been debased. This rift is clear in the difference of Jones' treatment of Shakuntala and Manusmriti. The eulogy of India and its nature and feminine qualities is missing from Manusmriti. While Jones advocated that Indians should be ruled according to their own laws, he firmly believed that the laws would not work until rescued from the hands of the native interpreters and custodians. Niranjana has identified the politics behind Jones' project of translating Indian text as an exercise in proclaiming cultural superiority, where the natives are considered to be unreliable interpreters of their own laws and culture, and need the intervention of the British to inform them about their own laws and purify their own culture. For that translation of ancient Indian legal text become all the more crucial. He learned Sanskrit so that he would not have to rely on poor Persian translations of original Sanskrit text anymore. Explaining the colonial policy on the system of personal laws for India, Governor General Hastings had clarified that in all suits regarding inheritance, marriage, caste and other religious usages or institutions, the law of the Quran with respect to Mohammedans or Muslims and those of the Shastras with respect to Jaintus or Hindus shall be invariably be adhered to. For Muslims of India, the British accepted Sharia as the legal code for Muslims based on texts such the Al-Sirjihaha and Fatwa Alamgiri written under sponsorship of Aurangzeb. For Hindus and other non-Muslims such as Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis and tribal people, this information was unavailable. The subsequent of Hindu law was derived by the British colonial officials from Manusmriti, and it became the first Dharmashastra that was translated in 1794. The British colonial officials, for practice, attempted to extract from the Dharmashastra the English categories of law and religion for the purposes of colonial administration. Abdullah Ahmed and Naimi discusses the consequent effects of this translation in his book Islam and the Secular State. The most concerted effort regarding the formation of Oriental knowledge through translations came from William Jones. Jones provided, among other things, an academic counterpart to Hastings' administrative concerns. He had read various references to the Manusmriti in the process of pursuing his vocation as a judge, and realized that it was one of the oldest extant works on law in India. After reading it in the original, Jones felt confident enough to undertake its translation himself. The outcome of this is the Institutes of Hindus Law, or the Ordinance of Manu. Jones' translation of the Manusmriti into English, this translation was highly influential in shaping cultural perceptions and legal systems for Indians. It also paved the path for Jones's Digest, a more comprehensive project completed by H.T. Colebrook. Jones had always looked for things antique and remote while dealing with Indian history. He declared that in all his inquiries concerning the history of India, he shall move downwards to the Mohammedan conquest at the beginning of the 11th century, but extend them upwards as high as possible to the earliest records of the human species. Two things are clear from this: the complete refusal to take cognizance of India's present in favor of a remote past, and the denigration of the Muslim even more than the Hindu, perhaps because Muslims were always stronger competitors of the English than the Hindus, as they were rulers too. Apart from Jones's translation of the Manusmriti, the text that gained became a constant point of reference to the British administrators and legal advisers was an English translation of the Indian legal text that is called Vivadharnav Setu, across the sea of litigation, as a code of Gentoo laws or ordinations of the Pandits in 1776 by Nathaniel Halhed. Halhed had learned Persian and Arabic before he learned Sanskrit. Halhed inaugurated the practice of Indian text in English translation by laying down in no unspecific terms the administrative usefulness of the court, the importance of the commerce of India, and the advantages of a territorial establishment in Bengal, have at length awakened the attention of the British legislature. Rita Kothari summarizes the varied responses that code gave way to. And Rita Kothari summary was, there are various issues regarding the code. Questions can be raised about whether the code thrice removed from Sanskrit can be considered a translation proper. William Jones raised doubts about the accuracy of the translation since it was based on a Persian rendering of the text. Jones mistrusted the Persian interpreter. To theoretical justice, the historians of civilization, the code became the fundamental source on Hindu laws and customs. On the other hand, practitioners in courts found the code full of inconsistencies. Mild misdemeanors appeared to call for severe punishment, whereas serious crimes led to mild reprimands. This sense of the contradiction added to the general European bewilderment regarding India. The laws serve as an index for assessing the level of civilization India had reached. To detractors like James Mill, who quotes copiously from the code. The laws only reinforced their opinion of the savage nature of the Hindus. Charles Wilkins was a more organized scholar among the Orientalists whose translated Bhagavad Gita gained the title of the Hindu Bible. He was also the first European translator to translate directly from Sanskrit and prepare a grammar of Sanskrit language. How and why the Gita came to be disseminated by the East India Company is a well-known narrative. And Rita Kothari did a very adequate analysis, very thought-provoking analysis in this matter, and she is right to emphasize the role translation has played in the canonization of the Gita in the Indian consciousness, and to make connections between its overwhelming reception in the West and its adoption by leaders like Gandhi and Tilak in defining India and uniting its people during the struggle for independence. The entire discussion of the paper takes us to a very specific idea of translation given by André Lefebvre, where Western cultures translated and translate non-Western cultures into Western categories to be able to come to an understanding of them and therefore to come to terms with them. According to Kohn, 18th century text including translations, travel writings and surveys began the establishment of discursive formation, defined an epistemological space, created a discourse and had the effect of converting Indian forms of knowledge into European objects. Orientalist investigation constructed and disseminated the image of India as a contact of spirits where everything is touched gently and tenderly, and perhaps to that extent is an illusion. Orientalism also looked at the Oriental Renaissance for the exotic, the unusual, the irrational, the emotional and the imaginative, and analyzed text like Shakuntala not under universal category but cultural category by raising pertinent questions concerning race, sex and hegemony. This being the reason the exotic becomes undistinguishable from racism. The purpose is to view the exotic as an ideological artifact to be collected and exhibited and to be distinguished from European literary texts, which are automatically informed by ununiversalized ethos. Major trends of representation of the Indians authorized by Orientalists like Jones worked across disciplines. These were taken up alike by Christian missionaries like William Carey and William Ward, and secular thinkers like J.S. Mill Ward's a view of the history, literature, mythologies of the Hindus, and Mill's history of British India imagine India in a stage of depravity characterized by sexual promiscuity, lack of rationality and focus in action, a state of constant flux and confusion of values. Thus we can see translations are attempt with social purpose and pre-performed with suitable additions, deletions, explanations and innovations. There are specific intentions, agendas and strategies involved when translation is undertaken. The variations in translations are the outcome of historical, social and cultural context in which the translation is situated. Translator's subjectivity, competence, gender, caste and nationality impact the process of translation. Translation must be seen as negotiation between text and between cultures in which translator acts as a mediator. Now, let us summarize our discussion. In this discussion, we mainly talked about three major texts which were translated by the British or by the Europeans. One is the translation of Abhigyan Shakuntalam by William Jones, another one is the translation of Manusmriti, and the third one is translation of Bhagavad Gita. We also discussed briefly about the translation of Gita Govindam, and we very clearly discussed here that what is the purpose, what was the purpose of translating for the British, and how this translation of Indian text by the Europeans, I mean how this translation of Indian text was necessary for the British Empire, for the colonization, for the whole Orientalist project. And through this discussion, we understood that this history of translation of Indian text by the European also reflects, also holds a history of Orientalism, history of colonialism in India. And we also came to know how the question of race, how the question of civilizations, cultures, and the community, very specifically the religious community, is involved or related with all with the purpose of translating all these texts. Thank you.